Hi, everyone. Is this the last talk? After this, we're going to do like a discussion? There's one more. Okay, good. So I took some notes on that. We'll see if I can look into my phone and hear what you were all saying. So this is great. This is fascinating. I'm Ike Sharpless. I want to talk to you a bit about the work of this woman, Hannah Arendt. Who here knows who this is? Okay, just a couple of you. So I'm going to do some explanatory work here. So she's well known as a critique of totalitarianism specifically, and lived under Nazi Germany, famously was also a critique of certain policies of Israel, and is very well known as an individual thinker, as an idiosyncratic thinker, but ultimately as someone who likes to think for themselves. And that's what I'm going to talk to you about today, is this process of thinking for oneself. And I'm going to try to connect it to what we've been doing. And so we're trying to talk about the future and the past, and how we understand the future, how it relates to the past. What is the future? We've had some talk about the future for the human species, for instance, as opposed to for some other animals, possibly. And all of this is constrained by how we choose to think about it. And we need to think about, I'm not committed to this logic of hygiene specifically, but thinking through our process of thinking. And so Arendt would tell us, we have a lot going on in the world that makes it difficult to think now. And this is some of what I'm going to describe to you. So this is all mixed up, but that's fine. These are some silly images. The one on the top left is kind of racist, I think. I think it's an English image of a Polish maid or something. I don't intend that to be part of the thinking, but just the idea that one needs to exercise one's brain. I tried to include some fun stuff here, but you can't really see what's going on, so maybe not so fun. But on the idea of Westworld, on the idea of the bicameral mind, but I'm going to skip over this because you can't really see it properly. But it's about the idea of our consciousness. What is it? Arendt says to be conscious is to be with yourself. Literally, it's in the etymology of the word. You're always actually with yourself. This is why Socrates says in the Gorgias, I'm a student of political theory, and ancient political theory in particular, that it's worse to commit sin. It's worse to commit something bad than to have something bad done to you. And the argument here is precisely that you always have to live with yourself. You don't always have to live with that other person. And so all of you know who have done things that you don't like, which is all of us, I imagine, you live with those things. And you learn to not want to be like that, to want to be better. And so this image, it says at the bottom, we are all like comets, each burning toward the future and shedding a tail of memory. I follow a lot of random science blogs, and one of them was about this idea that we humans, our narrative structure of our life, we tend to shed the past little by little. So we remember recent events more than further events, but we all look towards the future. So we all individually try and create a future for ourselves, but also for us as a society, as a collective, whether that's a human collective or the community of UCSD or the community of the United States of America or something else. These are all different kinds of communities. So unfortunately, this is not working out the way I wanted. So thinking is always dangerous, is what it says here. And the idea is that Socrates, one of my archetypes, is a gadfly, oh, there we go, is a midwife, and is an electric ray. These are all Hannah Arendt's ideas about Socrates. And so he's a gadfly because he's really annoying. If you've ever read anything by Plato, you'll know this. He's really obnoxious, and he gets in your face, and he says, no, why do you think that? Well, what's the reason you think that? So look under the hood of everything. And he's a midwife in the sense that he's not generative of knowledge, of virtue, of anything by himself, he says, but he can access it. He has this access, this sort of to nature, to the daimon, the good demon inside. But he's also an electric ray, as in he's shocked, he's paralyzed by the world. He doesn't understand how other people think they understand things, and he just wants to impose upon them this shock, to show them that we're in a state less clear than we might think. And so two ways of looking at the relation between fact and myth. The myths we tell ourselves about our past to get to our future, we often like to separate out the myth and the fact. We say, oh, the facts are over here, that's just myth. These are the real facts. This is a very modern orientation. So we had a talk on the ancient Romans. The ancient view of this matter would be quite different. It would be more cyclical, more of an appeal to myth. You would also have the myth in our facts, rather than the myths as opposed to our facts. The idea that everything is an identifiable fact and has to be situated as such is a modern idea in a historical sense that has some problems, actually. I'd be happy to talk about them. So this is, down at the bottom, between the curiosity of vanity and the curiosity of humility. Some of you have probably seen this image. It's a famous painting from Peter Bruegel. But it's about also what we're doing when we imagine a human future. So Asimov has a very epic human future in the stars. And it's sort of a certain conception of the human as a Prometheus, as someone that we will go to the stars, we will conquer the world, essentially. And so if the human future is a future of conquering the world, the rest of the natural world, I just want to present to you briefly that that's a scary idea, possibly, and that we may need to think beyond the human to think through that idea. This is an area of my own research interests. So before I close here, I wanted to talk to you about two different threats to our thinking: education in an age of commercialized attention capture. And these two threats are precisely capture and exteriorization. The second threat, it's jargony. The second one's been with us, Plato says, since we've had things like writing, like technology. Plato says writing makes us dumb, essentially. Similarly, access to our phone, access to any device that we can exteriorize our thinking, we no longer really have to think. We might drive into a river or something, God forbid. But the risk there is that we don't want to become stupid as a result of our intelligent devices, but it's an ever-present risk. And so Hannah Arendt would say that thinking is always possibly present and always possibly absent. The threat of totalitarianism is always real in mass society, in which you have attention merchants wanting to get your attention, buy it, and just dominate your eyeballs, essentially. And it's very disturbing in a lot of respects. Another concern is what could be called algorithmic subjectivity. Some terms you've maybe never heard of. If I'm confusing you, sorry. But this is just the idea that increasingly, if you have, say, your Spotify playlist or your Facebook feed or your various, it doesn't have to be social media, increasingly, if you have your preferences being told to you by algorithm, by machine, you sort of latch onto it because it's appealing. I find myself experiencing this, actually. But it can be quite disturbing because there's no real thought often in this process. It can be quite strictly ideological, which is problematic, I would say. So I've already discussed some of these, even though it's very confusing to look at. And so Arendt says that thinking is dangerous because it is common. It's something we can all do, always, and because it generalizes. It takes some particular thing and makes it more general. It brings it into a domain of generality. This is an ancient Aristotelian idea as well. But so some of the things we were talking about concerning finding parallax or unflattening our perspectives. In order to have perspective, you need to literally have 2 points of view on something. So I second this appeal, being in between some age groups maybe, to speak for the Republic. And this is different than speaking for your opinions or interests or views, possibly, in the sense that if the Republic is under threat, these other things might be moot, in a sense. And so I think this is a critical idea. Like, how do we defend these ideas? We need to think about them, and in any given situation, we need to see if we're being manipulated for ideological purposes, whether left or right or what have you, and to see if we can just think and sort of support this idea of the great experiment of this particular country. It's true in any other republic, I would say. So I just have two more mixed up slides here. So another reference I would tell to you all, if you've never read any books by a man named Ivan Illich on deschooling society, if we're talking about how to think of the future, to think of your life, to think of the purpose of education for you all, for us, and how it relates to the idea of school. So we're all in a school right now. Sometimes schooling and education run at cross purposes. Sometimes you want the stamp, you want the grade, you want to move forward. Education is a different matter, though, in the sense that it always is something we're always doing in all of our lives. And this, I don't know what to make of this particular, you belong in a museum. I mean, I'm the one who's showing it to you, but it's, so how many of you have at least seen the Indiana Jones films? Okay, this is one cannot take these things for granted. And one can also critique these films, especially if one is an archaeologist. But to say what belongs in a museum is why I'm putting this here. To say this implies that it's out of sight, it's out of touch, it's something useless you go and pay for, you go have fun. It's not something vital to our lives. In a sense, a museum, to take the ancient Greek sort of sense of this term, we have the muses of history, of art, of all these things. Our lives belong in a museum, and we shouldn't stick them in some room, I would say. So this is my last slide, an album I liked when I was a youth, and just a sort of cautionary tale to maybe link together some of the themes we've been hearing about how to think while interacting with social media in a world that's increasingly, we need to essentially brand ourselves, and how this sort of forces us to behave in a certain way. But also I would say that sometimes something like Facebook or Twitter can behave like a pretty hate machine in a sense. It's a pretty thing to look at, and it can be quite righteous and sometimes. And the righteousness is vital. It can get us a lot of really important places, and it has fostered a lot of critical social justice aims, including like the restorative justice talk we heard. But it's important also to keep a faculty of judgment, to be able to think independently for yourself in a way that you're not just being caught up in the wave, whether the wave is the anti-Trump or pro-Trump or what have you. I don't even want to talk about that. Okay, that's it. I'll end it there. Thank you.